Thank you that you are here, and thank you to each guest who is here, and thank you for what your country, your people, your nations are doing for Ukraine. But let's together make it faster. Last time we met here in Munich, exactly 1 year ago. It was 5 days before this terrible invasion. And here we were some of the same people who are with us today. Please look on the screen.
A big question is, will the Ukrainians fight? Will Ukraine be a porcupine that is indigestible by the Russian bear, or will the troops surrender and so forth? I have a pretty good degree of confidence that they are going to fight and that these partisan brigades are going to fight. Victor shared some polling results earlier that, you know, over half of those polled in Ukraine, this is half of the entire population, so everybody, half of them said, yeah, I'm going to take up a weapon and fight the Russians if they come into my country.
Продовжити дієво підтримувати Україну та її обороноздатність, надання чіткої європейської перспективи, наявних для країн кандидатів інструментів підтримки, чітких, осяжних часових рамок вступу в альянс. Підтримати трансформації в нашій країні, створити для України фонд стійкості і відновлення і програму ленд-лізу.
There is one thing that the West can easily do, and it really costs nothing, but it would be a game changer and would send the strongest possible message. It's granting Ukraine the status, the European perspective, and even the status of the candidate country right now. This costs nothing to the European Union. It's a political decision, but it would send a message to the people of Ukraine that you are one of us. And second, it would send a message to Putin that whatever you do, we will not abandon Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, by the way, I think we saw President Zelensky with a tie. I think it was, until today, it was, you know, last time he wore with a tie. Hopefully, this year he will come back to his peaceful dress code, I hope. Much of this is on the way. Ukrainians and the West did what some thought they could not do. It's possible, and it's incredibly important because we are fighting for freedom and we are fighting for the future of Ukraine, but we are fighting for the future of all civilization. What happened in Ukraine now really will determine all our future. So I want to ask you, who are in the office today, please use your time to the maximum. Don't wait. Now is your moment when you can change the world. From some leaders who left office, we hear, we underestimated the threat from Moscow. We didn't understand right. It was our mistake. Some acting leaders today say, I wish we had given this or that weapon earlier to Ukraine. You know, don't let this happen. Do it now. Do enough now while you can. It will be for all Europe and for everyone in the world who wants to live free. Please, do all you can, not even more. Do what must be done while you can. This is a unique moment in your life, and please use this moment to save, unique moment in your life to save lives of Ukrainians. This is what our discussion here is for. Thank you. And our great moderator, editor-in-chief of The Economist, Zanny, Minton, Beddoes. Zanny, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here again. I was lucky enough to moderate this conversation a year ago. Several of you on the panel today were there a year ago. I think some of you may have imagined or seen coming what happened a few days after last year's meeting, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but I don't think anyone could have imagined what happened in the subsequent year. The courage, the determination, and the success of the Ukrainian people in defending their freedom, and the unity of the Western Alliance, the scale of assistance, the unity of the European Union, the unity of the Transatlantic Alliance. But it's not over, as Victor put it. It's not over. Russia is, as we know, mobilizing for a new assault. It still occupies swaths of Ukrainian territory. And the victory, Victor, that you have alluded to is not yet here. So I want us in this conversation to look forward and to really answer three big questions. One is, does Ukraine have what it needs to be victorious? And if not, when will it get it? Secondly, what does that victory look like? What is the end game? And thirdly, to reflect a little on how this awful year, this outrageous invasion, has changed Europe, has changed Ukraine, and indeed has changed the post-World War order. So that's a small number of topics for you all to discuss. We have a huge number in the room who I know will also make interventions. So the briefest of introductions, and I'm going to go kind of from my right, so left to right by you. You know everybody, but just in case you don't, Petr Pavel, President-elect of the Czech Republic, welcome. Sanna Marin, Prime Minister of Finland, welcome. Ulf Kristersson, Prime Minister of Sweden, welcome. Kaja Kallas, Prime Minister of Estonia, welcome. David Petraeus, former Director of the CIA, Chairman of KKR Global Initiative, welcome. And Anne Applebaum, a journalist who frankly needs no introduction, but who writes absolutely some of the most powerful stuff on Ukraine, an absolute expert. So, welcome to all of you. General Petraeus, I'm going to start with you. You asked last year, and we were reminded just now, will the Ukrainians fight? Well, that was answered, and answered pretty powerfully. So now, does Ukraine have what it needs for a rapid victory?
Not yet, but let me reiterate what you just said. I did ask that question last year, and it was a very pointed question. Remember, for the United States, we just had an experience in Afghanistan where forces that we worked to support for 20 years at the end of the day watched as their president left the country, left them behind, and they did not ultimately, over time, fight. I did, as I noted there, expect that they would fight. I'd been to the Donbass. I'd watched the progression since 2014, actually since 2013 when I was with Victor at the last Yalta Economic Summit that was in Yalta. And so the expectation was there, but I have to say that what they have done has exceeded, I think, anyone's expectation, as has it's not just the soldiers who have fought, it's the entire country. And I think we also have to recognize that President Zelensky's leadership has been positively Churchillian as well. And so all of this has come together. The Russians have performed miserably, even worse than I think we expected them to, and the Ukrainians obviously have done magnificently, and the U.S., NATO, and Western countries have come through extraordinarily. But still, there are lots of needs, and I'll break these down in near, mid, and long term. In the near term, right now, what Ukraine is desperately trying to do is to hold off an intense and growing and increasing Russian offensive. So they need more ammunition right now. They need more precision munitions. They need spare parts, actually. A lot of things that aren't all that exciting just to sustain the fighting capabilities of the Ukrainian forces, especially around Bakhmut and the other areas in which the fighting is most intensive, and more air defenses, not only for the front lines, but obviously to protect civilian population as Russia continues to throw missiles, drones, and rockets at innocent civilians and their infrastructure. In the midterm, this is where the tanks come in. They are being provided. I do believe that they will be ready with the additional infantry fighting vehicles, longer range precision munitions that will take it from 80 kilometers out to 150 kilometers. more drones, but most of all, additional training, which is being conducted right now in Germany and other locations to enable the Ukrainians to do something the Russians have not been able to do. And this is something to watch very carefully. It is that they will be able to achieve combined arms effects. In other words, not just running tanks down a road and they run into the infantry and they stop. This is now tanks supported by infantry with artillery keeping the enemy down, engineers to reduce obstacles, air defense to keep their close air support off them, electronic warfare to jam the enemy, logistics right up behind them, and all the rest of this. And I think they're going to do that, and I think that will enable them to crack the Russian forces in the south and to maneuver around many of the obstacles once they crack that, and to break the Russian ground line of communication that enables them to support Crimea along that way. Then longer term, obviously, this is where Western aircraft come in, and this is inevitable. So to any of the parliamentarians or any members of my own U.S. Congress, this is a must. There are no more MiG-29s or flankers out there. It's time to get on with the decision to start training on F-16s or Eurofighters, not just the pilots, but more importantly, actually the people who will maintain them. This is the time also to get the longer range precision munitions, the ATACMS. So now we get out to 300 kilometers to reach into the air bases in Crimea and so forth. And this is the time to pull together all of the West together, a truly integrated air, ballistic, and drone early warning and defense system. And then, of course, finally, when victory comes, as Victor has predicted, that is when the Western Marshall Plan for Ukraine needs to be ready, the G7, EU, all together. But it requires one element that the economists may not think of, and that is an ironclad security guarantee. That will be the foundation without which reconstruction will not be possible, and that should ideally be NATO membership. If it is not, then there should be a U.S.-led coalition of the willing that establishes very clearly that this cannot happen again without an Article 5. Like we were concerned about sensitivities in the Kremlin before, that no longer obtains.
Thank you, General Petraeus. That's very clear, but I want you in 10 seconds to give me a sense of what is the time of the medium term? Is this 3 months, 6 months, 9 months?
Medium term is June.
Medium term is June.
Medium term is
thank
June.
you. With that, I'm going to turn to the politicians on the panel. So you heard it from the General. The tanks need to be there and effective by June. Prime Minister Kristersson, I was going to turn to you because I was struck by something that Chancellor Scholz said yesterday on the stage. He said, I quote, "All those who can supply battle tanks should actually now do so." The Germans took a long time to agree to the use of their Leopards. They've now freed the Leopards. Why aren't more countries, including your own, pledging more tanks?
Well, honestly, we are providing them with a smaller version of the tanks because we have a lot of them to be able to spare, and including the archer artillery. So I think in that sense we are really doing what we should be doing. But I think the basic message is still extremely clear. Don't wait until it's too late. I was in Kiev 2 days ago, and obviously they have one thing they really have what is needed, and that is they have the decisiveness, obviously. But what they do need is more arms to be able to handle what they are expecting for the coming months. I totally agree. We're talking about late April, May, June. So, I mean, the message is extremely clear. If you want us to win this war, you need to provide us with more arms. I think we are right now increasing all over the world. And the German decision last a couple of weeks ago was actually formative as well.
Prime Minister Marin, you said on stage, I think earlier this morning, that Europe needs to invest more in defense. And the rhetoric has shifted. But as you, and I'm going to ask Prime Minister Kallas too the same, as you watch the European debates, are you frustrated at the pace?
Well, of course, we could and should do more and we should do it faster. But still, when we look a year back, we have stayed united. We have put very harsh sanctions on Russia, and we are willing to do that in the future as well. We have provided Ukraine weapons, and we are willing to do this as long as it takes. We have provided financial aid, we have provided humanitarian aid, we have taken refugees with open arms to our countries. So we need to make sure that the message that we're sending now to Russia is that this help isn't ending. It doesn't end. As long as it takes, as long as Ukraine needs our help, we will help. And Finland will decide very soon our 13th arms package to Ukraine. And also to the common effort, I think it's very important that we are discussing together tanks, in the future planes, the training that Ukrainians needs to use these weapons effectively. We need this kind of common efforts because none of us can help alone. We need each other, and together we can really make a difference.
Finland will support with tanks?
Well, I won't announce it, our arms package right here.
You can sense the frustration of the Ukrainians because everyone says, we will support you for as long as it takes. But when you're pushed for specifics, people are not coming up with it.
But we have had a policy that we don't announce actually publicly. We don't say out loud what we have provided. Ukrainians know what we have provided. We will say in general. We will have, of course, some kind of statement when we will decide the 13th package, and we will discuss the Ukrainians what they need all the time. We have very good connections, what they need on the field, and this is something that we want to provide. Do I feel frustrated with the situation in Europe? Of course, me and Kaja have been, and also Ulf and others have been in the discussion in European Council. Just last week, Kaja proposed this. I think it was very important, and I supported this idea that we would speed up and scale up our military production in Europe so that we can give to Ukraine what is in storage right now, and then we can fulfill the storages later. We need this kind of efforts, and I think it was very important what Kaja proposed, and this is something that we will continue discussing in our March European Council meeting.
Thank you. Kallas, what is your sense of this? And in particular, the rhetoric is clearly very positive, but do you sense in your European meetings the reality is a little bit of Ukraine fatigue setting in?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, in this regard that we all have our domestic problems and those kick in, high inflation, energy issues, all of this. But at the same time, we have done huge decisions, and by our decisions and deeds, we show that we are behind Ukraine. I mean, we have done huge military packages and are continuing to provide military aid. And what Sanna was referring to, I made a proposal last week that we could, provide funds to the European Commission or European Peace Facility, and they would procure directly from the defense industry, and it could be sent directly to Ukraine. So we could actually speed up the process. And today I had meetings with the defense industry as well, and I asked them, so, I mean, why aren't you speeding up the production? I mean, everybody is saying that, we are increasing our defense expenditure to already over 3%. Countries are doing the same, plus we are providing Ukraine military aid. So why aren't you producing? Russia is producing in 3 shifts, and why isn't European defense industry doing the same? And they say that we don't have the orders. We don't have the orders, and if we don't have the orders, we can't make the investments. So that's why, the process that we could do the same way as we did with vaccines, we do it together, we could do it directly, then the defense industry has the orders, they could produce and start. But still, I would say, and I said today also to the defense industry, I mean, read the signs. This is not going away. We have to support Ukraine further. Then, even if the war ends, or when the war ends, it doesn't mean that we will not stop procuring ammunition, because the threat is still there, and everybody is boosting their defense. So don't worry about, you can make the investments now and start to produce.
It's a little chicken and egg, though. The defense industry is waiting for the orders, and you are saying produce.
But you know, it's a market economy, and I've been in private practice for most of my working life, and you read the global trends and European trends, and if you read the trends, you can clearly see that there is a demand for ammunition, military equipment. So I would read the room and start to produce now.
That's very clear. Thank you. President-elect Pavel, you are going to join this debate. You also are on the panel, I think, other than General Petraeus, the one with the most direct military experience. So how do you see this, and do you think Europe should be doing more than it is doing, and will your own country be doing more?
Well, I am proud that the Czech Republic was one of the first to provide heavy equipment to Ukraine. Tanks, armored vehicles, helicopters, multiple rocket launchers, lots and lots of ammunition. So all of this has been already provided. With the funds from especially Netherlands, we were able to put up together about 90 T-72 tanks and also sent them to Ukraine. There are not so much that we could provide, because we would have to take parts of active equipment of our units. But I believe there are some other ways how to send additional equipment to Ukraine. Some of them are already in place, like acquiring Soviet production equipment all around the world, bringing it to countries where it can be refurbished and sent very quickly to Ukraine. Another possibility is to provide a service to damaged equipment from Ukrainian battlefield, to speed up the process, make it easier with custom administration, and then make our facilities available for repair of Ukrainian equipment. Then we have the format like Copenhagen conference, providing funds for the equipment that can be either produced or modernized in other countries. So let's be flexible, let's do whatever we can, let's be innovative in all the ways that we can support Ukraine. I would probably add one thing to what General Petraeus said in terms of equipment that is needed for Ukraine, and it's air defense assets. Air defense, both anti-aircraft, anti-missile, whatever we can deliver, it's needed now in the short term, because apparently Russian military are losing their capability in ground forces, and then most probably they will move more for the air operations. So the more air defense assets we deliver to Ukraine right now, the better.
Thank you. I'm not sure, General Petraeus, whether I'm 100% convinced that your wish list will arrive in the time frame you said, but there seems to be clearly the political commitment, at least. Let's move on to the second topic of what then, assuming Ukraine does get the support that it needs, what is the end game? What does a Ukrainian victory look like? And Anne, I'm going to ask you to sketch out what you think a Ukrainian victory looks like and should look like.
Thank you. Before beginning, let me make clear that what I'm about to say is a statement of realism. In other words, it reflects the realistic reflection of power. It doesn't reflect an IR theory, but it reflects what's happening on the ground. And the realistic truth is that the war will end when the Russians understand that it was a mistake. So the war ends when, as the French in Algeria, after a decade of fighting, finally decided that it was not worth holding on to this territory. As the British in Ireland decided at the beginning of the 20th century that Ireland was really not a part of Great Britain and it was okay to let it go, the war will end when we come to that moment. And by end, I mean really end. So it's not a frozen conflict. It's not a ceasefire that will start again next year. It's not, Minsk 3 or 4 or 7 or 15. It's actually over, and we begin to reconstruct Europe, and Russia begins to redefine itself no longer as an empire. And so the question is, what do we have to do to create that change? And really, it's unsayable. I understand why politicians can't speak that way. I think Joe Biden said so, maybe accidentally, maybe not, during the speech he gave in Warsaw about a year ago. But what we need is a change of thinking in Moscow, and I don't care how that change comes about. President Putin wakes up one morning and has a revelation, or he falls down the stairs. I don't care. But what can we do to make that change? And it's my view that change will come about as the result of Ukrainian victories. So it will come about as a result of territorial conquest, at the very least, recapturing territory, especially in the south, that was taken since last February. Possibly this may have to include Crimea. Why Crimea? Because Crimea has symbolic significance for Putin himself. It's the moment when his presidency began to revive. Even attacks on Crimea, so even beginning to hit Crimea, scare Crimea, make people who live in Crimea worried, cut off supplies to Crimea, whether or not it ever becomes a normal part of Ukraine again is less important than that Putin begins to see that it's under threat. And this is the moment when you could begin to get some kind of political change or different thinking. And that is the real answer to when the war ends.
Thank you, Anne. That was extremely clear. The war ends when Russia understands it was a mistake, and that requires territorial gains that include destabilizing, if not complete control over Crimea. Let's ask Prime Minister Marin first. Do you agree with that assessment?
I fully agree with that statement. I think the most important thing is to help Ukraine any way we can, so that the war will be so costly to Russia that at some point it has no other alternative than to leave. The biggest mistake that we could make right now, and I have heard also these kind of statements and thinking across Europe, is to be afraid. Because Putin is intimidating us with this nuclear threat and with his statements. And the biggest mistake that we could make is to think that how can we act so that the situation wouldn't escalate? It has escalated already. There are people dying every day in Ukraine, civilians, mothers, children, people all across Ukraine. People are dying every day, so the situation is already escalated. So we need to provide Ukraine the weaponry, all the financial help that they need. We need to make sure that the society keeps up and running. And we shouldn't let this kind of thinking within our societies. How can we make sure that the situation won't escalate any further? I think the nuclear threat, it's only intimidation for Putin's side, and they want us to be afraid and us to be intimidated. And our job is to support Ukraine and make sure that the war will end when Ukraine is ready to decide for themselves.
Go ahead, Kallas.
Building up on that, it is clear what we have to do is that this aggression cannot pay off, which means that the message out there should be that you will pay higher for the aggression and you wouldn't win any territories. Otherwise, it serves as an invitation to use it even more because you have gained something. But it's also equally important that even when the war is still going on, we talk about accountability, which means that you can't get away with the crimes of aggression and war crimes. A crime of aggression is a leadership crime. So it is like giving green light to all the other war crimes that the soldiers are committing. And this is very important that we work on this, that there is a separate tribunal, that we work and there is no impunity and no immunity for the crimes of aggression. That means the leaders also. And this is also important because it is relevant for the sustainable peace. Nuremberg Tribunal, what was one of the positive sides of it was that the German people actually got to know of the crimes that were committed. And we know that history repeats itself because Russians don't really know the history. They don't really know what their people and the country has done to other countries. And if that keeps on repeating itself, then we will see more wars and more not the sustainable peace, really.
Thank you. You've made that very clear. Prime Minister Kristersson, can I just hold on a second? Because I've just seen Foreign Minister Kuleva has joined us. Very good to see you again. I just want to quickly ask you the two questions I've already asked the rest of the panel, because I think your perspective on this would be very important. The first one, very briefly, is does Ukraine have what it needs for victory? And if not, what does it need? Very, very briefly.
When we win, I can tell you that we had everything that we needed to win. As long as we are fighting, there is never enough. And I think this is how the war works everywhere. We definitely have more than we had in the beginning. And last year we had a clear understanding that we need 7 types of weapons to become fully capable in defending and liberating our country. We call it, or I call it, the Big 7. And in 12 months, we have 6 out of 7. Planes remaining the only outstanding issue. I think the progress is pretty impressive. But if last year the key word for me was weapons, this year there will be 2 key words: speed of delivery and sustainability. This is crucial. Everything that has been pledged to us has to arrive on time to be of relevance. And this is what we have to focus on. This is what I'm focused on here in Munich, speaking with various friends and colleagues. And the second question?
Well, I'll follow up to the first one, which is the answer to your own question. Everything has to arrive on time to be of relevance. You're here in Munich, you're talking to your allies. How far off that are they?
It depends on what... The thing that I learned about weapons is that there is no space for a general discussion. You have to be very specific on everything. I learned a lot about artillery, about tanks. Now I'm learning a lot about spare parts for tanks. My next challenge is to learn planes, and I'm sure that we will do that as well. The biggest... everything can be fixed when the conversation is very specific. It's not like, get it done. No, you have to know what kind of spare part, when you have to get it, where you have to get it. And this is what we're focused on. Sometimes we, as senior officials, are forced to go into details, which we usually don't do. But I see Prime Minister of Sweden, I'm happy to see him, and you were in Kyiv a couple of days ago. And Prime Minister had a very specific conversation with President Zelensky. 2 leaders went into details on the issue of ultimate importance. So remain focused, do not procrastinate with decision making, which are unavoidable, and it's going to work. That's very simple, at least it sounds so.
So to give you a little second to think about the second question, the second question the panel is in the middle of debating is, what does the end game look like? What does a Ukrainian victory look like? But just before we go to that, to your view on that, I actually wanted to call on one of the Germans on the front table, and perhaps, I don't know, Wolfgang Schmidt, would you like to intervene? Chancellor Scholz's Chief of Staff, I spy you there. Your Chancellor, as I quoted yesterday, said very clearly that it was time for people to start delivering tanks. Are you disappointed by the pace at which your friends who'd been calling on you to make a change have actually not delivered anything so far? And when is that going to change?
No, I'm not disappointed, and I think we should maybe learn something from that episode, and that is stick these kinds of debates internally. Let's have this honest exchange, as Sanna Marin said, and then have a united front vis-a-vis Putin and Russia. And maybe we should learn from that, attacking each other in the public, demanding stuff, criticizing. That's not the way forward. Let's do our work, get into the details, and deliver the stuff that is needed.
And you heard, were you here when General Petraeus laid out his list of what was needed? Does that comport with your view of what is needed too?
We are all in the process of assessing what is needed at the moment with our militaries, the active ones obviously, and also retired, and building up the picture, but in very close cooperation with the Ukrainians.
Great, thank you. Foreign Minister Kuleva, let's turn to you and your assessment of what is the end game, and one just to give you a quick summary of what Anne Applebaum very cogently put it. She said, when the Russians understand that it was a mistake. But is that an end game that results in a peace agreement? Does it result in a frozen conflict? Does it result in an armistice? What is your assessment of what that end game is?
Every war has two end games. The first one is when guns are silent and the enemy leaves your territory. And for me, this short end game, I don't know how much time it will take, but this is the short end game. It's the full liberation of Ukrainian territory. There will be no contact, no other contact lines. There will be no concessions on territory. We've been there, we've seen it, it didn't work. Full liberation, that's point one. But then there comes the long end game, and that will cover accountability, compensations, but most importantly, there will be a question of how do we make sure that Russia is not capable of repeating it. And I think this is an important conversation that has to begin, the conversation about the future of Russia. I've spent around about 24 hours here in Munich, and I was involved in some very focused and detailed conversations about European security architecture, global security architecture, China-US relations. I didn't hear anyone actually talk, maybe I missed some meetings, there's a lot of happening here, but I didn't hear anyone going into details, trying to find a simple answer. What kind of Russia do we need to live in peace? And how do we get there? We have to start talking about that. And my personal end game is very simple. I said it once, I think 2 years ago. I immediately became a star on Russian propagandist shows. When I said that for me, the end of the war will be when the Russian president, whatever his name will be, will pay a visit to Ukraine, will stand on his knees in front of the monument to the victims of the Russian aggression, and will beg for an apology. For me, this will be the end of the war. Everything between here and then is a war one way or another.
Thank you. That's a sobering assessment. Can I just ask you, can I just clarify your short end game? Full liberation of Ukrainian territory, no contact lines, that includes, that's the 1991 Ukrainian territory, includes the liberation of Crimea.
That's the only Ukraine that exists is the one within its internationally recognized borders. And I'm always, when I hear, I'm sorry, but when I hear this phrase, including Crimea, this question, I always ask journalists to stop reinforcing the Russian narrative. Because when you say including Crimea, you make the point that Crimea is somehow special, that it's different from Donetsk, from Lugansk, that from the rest of Ukraine. No, it's not. Simferopol and Donetsk are Ukrainian cities. These are all Ukrainian territories. By making the point that Crimea is special, I'm sorry, don't get me wrong, and don't ask me bad questions after that, but you are reinforcing the Russian narrative.
I'm actually reflecting a discussion that goes on in many countries and amongst many of your allies. But I take your point. Prime Minister Kristersson, let's turn to you. The Foreign Minister made it very clear what the short-term endgame was and the long-term endgame. Do you agree with his assessment? And if so, will this war ever end?
I do agree with the assessment, and obviously our common capability of delivering arms enough is obviously of huge importance for ending at that stage in the short and the long term. I think that's very obvious. And I think, as some have stressed, even not said it clearly, is we need much more coordination between countries, because now we do what we think we can spare from our own defense, what we have on stock basically, but too little coordination between countries. I think the tanks deliveries is a good start on that. I think we will see much more the more advanced arms we actually provide Ukraine with. But may I add on one thing, and I think that's needed to say, and I think there was a message also from President Zelensky. This must not end in a frozen conflict. It must not end there, even though there will be a lot of people kind of supporting the idea of ceasefire, basically. Because it's so obvious that the risk of the Russians kind of going back, rebuilding, reconfiguring, and then coming back, and that would not solve anything at all. So I think that to be very committed to the fact that this needs to be the result, and everything that even looks like a frozen conflict without any kind of operating fires going on, that would be a huge mistake, I would say.
So just to be clear, if it must not end in a frozen conflict, then your view is that the Western support must continue, the military support must continue until the definition that the foreign minister has laid out of Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Basically, yes, and I do agree with the fact that let's discuss this in a calm way, but on the other hand, don't neglect the fact that the public debate and what many of the good things that the Ukrainian friends have done is be so extremely public about what they need and be so detailed also. You should see the list we receive. They don't leave anything for your imagination. They actually are very precise. And I think the public debate on this is actually driving also the public opinion in our democracies for further help. Because that was not self-evident 1 year ago. Not least in a country like my own, where we almost said in the beginning, this is kind of against the law to provide another country with weapons.
Prime Minister Marin, let's get your perspective. And you have focused a lot on the need for accountability for the Russians. I guess I'm trying to understand how we get to this situation that Foreign Minister called the long result, the final end of this. Is it possible with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin? Is it possible anytime soon?
Well, I think I understand that we also need to discuss about Russia and the future of Russia. But right now, I think the more important thing is to focus on Ukraine. And the end game, the long-term end game for Ukraine, I would like to see Ukraine part of European Union, member of NATO, really part of the West, the democratic world, where it belongs, where it wants to be. So we need to make sure that the end game for Ukraine is a prosperous nation, good, prosperous nation where people can live their lives happily, where children can get education, where they can export wonderful things, where they have a very good industry and economy. So I want to see Ukraine that is thriving, because Finland also have had wars with Soviets, with Russia, and our path forward with those devastating years was that we stayed independent. And we built our nation, the welfare state it is today. We are a member of European Union, and we will become member of NATO. So I want to see that kind of future, a bright future for Ukraine and Ukrainian people. And I hope that this is something that we will together make sure that will really happen. We need to discuss about Russia, but I think the more important thing is to make sure that Ukraine will be a good nation for its people in the future.
As part of NATO and part of Europe.
Yes.
Prime Minister Kallas, your perspective, and particularly the question of if there are negotiations in the end, and I take the point that there is the short run and the long run, but if there are negotiations to finally put this war behind, what is the role of outside partners?
First, as I mentioned before, the accountability is very important, and we have been pushing for this special tribunal. This is not only the war crimes can be prosecuted by the ICC and Ukraine because they are committed on the territory of Ukraine, but there wouldn't be any war crimes if there wouldn't be a leadership crime, which is the crime of aggression. Leadership, the leaders of Russia deciding to attack another country. So if there is no accountability, responsibility for that crime, then it will just continue. What we did, in 2014, I remember very clearly, I see some colleagues that we were working together with. I was a member of European Parliament and in the Ukrainian delegation. And what we did, or where we were wrong at that time, was that, okay, let's draw a line here. Crimea is gone, forget about it, let's move on, so everybody stays where they are. And the message that the dictator got it from this is that, okay, this pays off. I'm attacking another country, I get the territories, so I walk off, I take a few years a pause, and then I do it again. And that's why the accountability is very important. And through that accountability, we also get to the Russian public, to the people, to understand that what they have done so far, it hasn't got to them. They don't know about the crimes that they committed in my country, in Ukraine, in Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, everywhere. They don't know about this, and therefore there is no, you can't be responsible or you can't be accountable for this. What is also important for the sustainable peace is that there will be no grey areas in Europe. Grey areas, they mean conflicts, they mean wars, which means that NATO has to be really open door policy, not only to Finland and Sweden, but also Ukraine. Of course, post-war we are talking, but it is clear that you can draw the line that Putin has a say who gets to be in the defense alliance. The reason why we are not having the war right now is that because we are in NATO. So NATO is a peace project. And in order to have sustainable peace, the doors have to be open for NATO, but also for European Union.
You make that point very powerfully. I'm going to ask President-elect Pavel and General Petraeus for their perspectives, but then I want to open to some voices from the floor. Let me hear from you, President-elect Pavel, because you listened to this in a very, very clear, strong outline of what is needed for peace, but it seems very, very far off.
Well, I would be extremely happy if this all that has been said happens in the next couple of months. However, I'm not living in an ideal world, and that's why I'm a bit more skeptical. Because I understand Ukrainian desire to bring this war to the end where all Russian soldiers leave the last inch of Ukrainian soil, and Russian president occasionally comes to Kiev and on his knees begs for an apology, but presents an apology. But we may end up with a situation where liberating some parts of Ukrainian territory may deliver more losses on lives than that will be bearable by society. So there might be a point where even Ukraine will start thinking about a different outcome. And we should be also ready for such an eventuality, because it's not about expecting the best, it's about being ready for the worst. And that's why I would call for caution in assessing the potential outcomes of this conflict. because even if there is an eventuality that Russian military collapses, Ukrainian army will push them out of Ukraine, then we will have a collapsed Russia. That means that there is no one to negotiate any security guarantee regime with, and there is no one to work with on a future security architecture in Europe. And we will have, with collapsed Russia, we will have lots and lots of problems that we do not consider right now. So I think it is much better to be realistic, hope for good, but be ready for worse.
Thank you very much. General Petraeus, your perspective, particularly, do you agree that a frozen conflict is no solution? And I'm just reminded of what's going on in...
I do agree with. It cannot be a frozen solution, but there... And I share the reservations, the cautions of my fellow retired general who served NATO so effectively and brilliantly as the chairman of the NATO Military Committee in his last assignment before entering the murky world of politics, and I congratulate him on his victory. I do, again, share those reservations. I think there is some possibility of a negotiated resolution at some point in time, which would be reached when Russia realizes that the war is unsustainable. So I'm very much with Anne that this has to be conveyed, and it's conveyed in two ways. It's not just on the battlefield, where Russia has already taken many times the losses in a single year that it took in a decade in Afghanistan, which was unsustainable for the then Soviet Union. It has to be conveyed on the home front as well. So there's got to be, the political leaders have got to really ratchet down the personal, financial, and economic sanctions and export controls. And you talk about detail, you've got to attack every supply chain for every major industry that's supporting the war effort. And you have to go after those. Again, unsustainability means in the minds of Putin that he literally cannot continue this war. Now, where the war is at that time, I think remains to be seen. But I think and then the caution that at some point in time, there could be some potential where you get a Marshall Plan, you get membership in NATO, and the bombs and missiles and so forth strike. I'd like it to be when it's Ukraine whole and free. But again, with my fellow retired general, I'm not convinced that may be the case. I hope it is.
But
that's what we should be enabling them to do. Yeah.
Thus far, there has been, tremendous Western alliance unanimity on sanctions, but they are not really working that well. There are many, many countries in the world that are not applying them, and that's presumably not going to change. So I'm not sure how much you can expect.
It has to change, Zanny. Again, the economy is only down by 3.5% last year in Russia, GDP. And this year, the IMF says it might grow 0.5%. That's unacceptable. And the political leaders have got to figure out how to do this. The Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury is running this. He's a brilliant guy, Rhodes Scholar and all the rest. And I think they can do much, much more and do it much more effectively. So that has to happen on that front. We have to do all that we can to enable them to achieve what they can. The one dynamic I am watching for, in which I hope to see, is that the Ukrainian forces, by achieving combined arms operations and effects and maneuver, and I've seen this during the fight to back, I'm one of the few in this room, actually, with Ben Hodges. We invaded a country. I know what this takes. And if they can get that kind of momentum going, it's terrifying to the enemy. And then you could see the Russians start to crumble and maybe even collapse, at least locally, and then perhaps more broadly. Again, the casualties that they are taking are just, they're beyond comprehension to someone. The worst month we had during the surge in Iraq was 143 losses. They're taking 6 times that in a single day.
But Vladimir Putin doesn't seem to care about how many lives he loses. There are lots of questions. I want to get a few comments from the floor, and then we're going to come back to all of you, particularly Anne, who has not had the floor enough. I'd love, first of all, to hear a view from Dmytro Anashin, who is a true Ukrainian war hero. Dmytro, would you like to give us your perspective on what is at stake? You have been absolutely at the heart of this.
Доброго дня. Насправді зараз
Hello, it is true that a lot of discussion now is around time, that we have to wait, we have to see what will happen later and how the situation will evolve. Just 1 minute for them to take on the headsets. Yes. They need time to take the headsets on, right? Now the world doesn't know what kind of weapon to give to Ukraine. We need air defense. It's extremely difficult for the soldier to fight and not know what happens to your family back in the rear during the air raid alarm. So you can imagine the situation. You're waking up in the morning, you kiss your wife and children, you go to work and you say, see you later in the evening, and then there may not be no coming back. You can come back and there will be shambles there, and the rubbles where your family is buried, and that's horrifying to the civilians and for soldiers who have to think about warfare, about fighting, about protecting their country, and they're ready to give up their lives for the country and those who are behind their back. They also have to think about families, about their kins, and that undermines the fighting spirit. And I think you understand what I'm talking about in this case. You want to believe that your family is safe, is fed, and it's difficult to be sure in that under these circumstances. And we don't have that much time to wait. Of course, we will stand strong until last man in Ukraine. We have no other choice, but the mobilizing reserve in Russia is much bigger than in Ukraine, and we need to have fire advantage. And when that happens, with our own hands, single-handedly, we will push them back to the borders of 1991. We will achieve those results. All we need is fire advantage. You do have it. And when everyone says that we can't allow NATO or the world to get engaged in this war directly, everyone is already involved. Armament from all over the world is fighting now against Russia in Ukrainian hands. And if you try to do it a bit faster and a bit more, then I'm sure everything will work out, and jointly we will achieve the result, and then we'll think about holding Russians accountable, because now for them there is no international law for Russians. They ignore all human and legal norms. So I do hope for this support. Just think about it from the more human point of view, and it will be easier for you to understand why we keep talking about this, because there's lots of such statements, and everyone keeps saying that, yes, we need this, we need that, but when you will see this with the eyes of the rank-and-file Ukrainian, you will perceive it in a completely different manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for all you've done. I'd like to get one more perspective from Ukraine. The Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament is here, Ruslan Stefanchuk. Could we also hear from you? Thank you.
It's very difficult to say something more that told Dmytro, because the Dmytro is one of the heroes of Ukraine who looks the war on his own eyes. And that you're talking about here, that's a real speech of real soldier, of real Ukrainian, a real hero of Ukraine. And speed, it's the main words that we talk about here. The speed is a ground of our existence now. And because it's very important for understand everyone who are here, that it's very important the different types of weapons that we have in Ukraine. But we want that the time between you have the decision and you'll realize this decision will be as shortly as it possible. Because please, be fast, be together with Ukraine, and we will win. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very clear, and I see from the nodding on the panel, very well taken. I'd like to get a U.S. perspective. I believe Congressman Neil Dunn is here. Congressman, would you like to offer a perspective on what you've heard, and particularly on what your sense is of the end game?
Well, thank you very, very much. First, let me say the Munich Security Conference, always an interesting place to be, but with a full-fledged war going on in Europe, it's vital that we get these great minds, these great leaders, very influential people throughout the room, get us all together and share ideas. It's never been more important. And by the way, I think this is as good a panel as I've seen put together in my life, including this entire conference. This great panel, so enjoyable. Think who we have: presidents, prime ministers, great famous generals. I'm so journalists of great renown. I'm very impressed. I think this is important. I think there are several things that we've learned just here today. I think a realistic appreciation for what the war looks like when we win is great. And I think these leaders have that. And I get the sense, I come here and I take away the sense that all of the European leaders actually have a realistic sense of what this is going to take. Yes, we all wish it would be faster. We all wish that we would be a little bit better partners, honestly, to Ukraine. Let's just resolve to be better than we have been in the past and keep doing what we're doing. And let me say the other thing that the whole world has learned in the last year is that the Ukrainian people are unbelievably brave, unbelievably persistent, and retain in the worst situations their sense of compassion and unity with each other, and they deserve nothing less from us. And I thank you so much for convening this very panel.
Thank you, Congressman. Can I just ask you to reflect on two things? You heard several times from our Ukrainian colleagues about the need for speed. Congressman, you've taken them. Can we just give the Congressman the microphone back? The need for speed. Do you think more can be done to be speedy? And secondly, can everybody in this room rely on sustained U.S. support?
Let me answer the second question first. Yes, we can rely on sustained American support, and I think it's getting stronger. And I think the chance to talk to all of you, not just the members of the Ukraine delegation, but all of you, does nothing but reinforce the need for that. And you can talk to my colleagues here gathered and see if I'm right, but I'm just certain I am, because I talk to them all the time. So yes, we're committed to that. Could it be faster? In my youth, I was a soldier. Yeah, it could be faster. It's never been fast enough. So yeah, it's important that we speed this up. And we know we can speed this up. And I think this panel has made some excellent suggestions on just that. I know that Prime Minister Kallas has told us again and again, there's ways to speed up the industrial production. We know what we need to do to get industry kind of into gear. Let's do it. Let's do it. And this is spending, by the way, that is infrastructure spending when you build up your national security forces, and it's non-inflationary. Just a couple of economic points, huh?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Let me now turn back to the panel, and Anne Applebaum, to you. You laid out a very clear definition of what, in your view, the world needed to look like when this war ended. First of all, can you give me a sense of a time frame in which you think your own vision will be achieved? And secondly, how do you react to what President-elect Pavel said when he said there is a risk that there is no Russia with which to insist that it would have resulted, I'm putting words into your mouth, but to the breakup of Russia?
So, first of all, we're now in the realm of black swan events. We are now in an unprecedented world where we have, as the general has just said, unprecedented Russian casualties. We don't know what the internal arguments look like inside the Russian military. We don't really know what's going on inside the country. It's a country where when an opinion poll is taken, 9 out of 10 people refuse to answer it. So we don't really have a sense of what's going on there. So I'm not going to give you a prediction. I'm just going to say that change in Russia could come tomorrow or this afternoon, or it could come in a year. But it is that moment when there is a change that we will have a permanent change of climate in Russia, and we will have a permanent change in Europe. Let me also just say, this was said, I heard in a conversation a couple of days ago, or maybe, yes, I lose time here, lose track of time. A French colleague was reminding us of what happened in France when the decision to withdraw from Algeria took place. There were coup d'etat rumors, there were protests, there was an enormous amount of instability and anxiety. But France eventually got through it and became a post-colonial power and an important part of the European Union, which is a post-colonial project. Something like that will eventually happen in Russia, and we should welcome it. Several years ago, I, out of curiosity, went back and looked up the obituary of Stalin that was published in the Times of London in 1953. It was very, very long. It was kind of 2 long pages. Must have been a very long time ago when I did this, because I remember going to a library and actually looking at a microfilm. In the obituary, he was good, he was bad, he was our ally, and so on. But there was one paragraph that struck me, and the paragraph said, of course, he was a very difficult leader and so on, but now the hard men are waiting in the wings. The radicals are waiting in the wings. So this was Stalin. This is one of the worst dictators in European history. So we tend to always look at Russia and we think something worse is coming next. And maybe it's true. But it's also true that whoever comes next, whether it's one of the, whether it's Garry Kasparov, who's in the room, or whether it's, Prigozhin, or whoever is the next leader of Russia, whoever it is will be better. He will be better because it will not be his war, and because he will not have the kind of authority that Putin has. So particularly if it's a military leader, he will be weak. So change in Russia is to be welcomed. It is an inevitable part of this process. And as I said, it's how the war will end and how we will eventually achieve some kind of stability in Europe, and it will happen.
Thank you. Kaja Kallas, you wanted to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I wanted to take up on that. If people admire dictators, there's no obstacle of becoming one or submitting to one. And that's what we are seeing in Russia, actually. Imperialism is not a negative thing. They have defined themselves through being the masters of all of us that are actually not Russians. So for me, it is not that easy, because when Putin attacked Crimea, it had a huge public support. Really, people were like, we are taking back our territories, and we see also the Russians also living in Estonia that arrived after we were occupied, and they remember those times when they were the masters, and they want this time to be back. So if people actually, are supportive of imperialism, it just keeps on repeating. And why I talk about the accountability is that people don't really know what the Russians have done to different countries and different worlds. The positive effect of a Nuremberg tribunal was also that the Germans got to know what the Nazis did, and therefore also had, the public perception that, and public guilt, if I may say so. And that is not there in Russia right now.
I want to get to everyone. Okay, so Prime Minister Marin, we'll get to you first, and then I want to ask the panel about how they think what not just Ukraine and indeed Europe looks like after this. But give us your perspective first.
Well, I think it's very important that at this stage and time we are also preparing for a window of opportunity. So that we are discussing together with Ukraine, with us Europeans, and also our close partners, trusted partners in the United States, if there will be window of opportunity to be present. Are we ready to act on it? President Zelensky has proposed a 10-point peace plan, and we are supporting this approach, and hopefully everybody is on board. And I also want to thank United States for your leadership and for your effort during the war. We couldn't manage We couldn't manage as Europe alone without United States and the help of our closest partners. And this needs to be said out loud, and I'm very happy also of the Vice President Kamala Harris's speech today, and she also told that the support won't end, even though there might be political changes in the future. Nobody knows, we live in democracies, but the support won't stop, and this is very important message, and it should be the message of the whole Munich Security Conference, that whatever it takes, how long it takes, we will support, and that support won't stop.
Thank you. Let's turn. There seem to be there are many questions about what the world looks like after this, but I think there are two key ones, and perhaps Foreign Minister Kuleva, will start with you. What is the nature of the security guarantee that Ukraine needs, and the actual support for that? And secondly, what is the nature of the economic assistance it needs? And it is. Everyone says we will support for as long as it takes. It's easy to say that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but it is easy to say that. But in practice, what is the minimum effective security guarantee? What is the economic requirement? And are you confident, Foreign Minister, that your allies will provide both?
Well, the best security guarantee, not only for Ukraine, but for Europe as a whole, is Ukraine's membership in the EU and NATO. And an answer to the question how Russia will look like. And I firmly believe, maybe I'm dream too much, but I firmly believe that you cannot solve today's problems without having a vision for the future you are fighting for. And this is why the conversation, I've heard many times, including now, this argument, this is not a timely debate. Let's focus on something else. NATO is not on time, is not a timely debate. Let's focus on something else. NATO is timely debate. Because if we had this debate years ago, we probably would have been discussing something else today. The same goes for, but what happens between now and membership in NATO is an issue for a discussion. And we have this Kiev Security Compact as a document that basically describes options of security guarantees of what could be done. To boil it down, I think the best 3 security guarantees Ukraine can get between now and NATO is weapons, sanctions, and financial support. I don't have numbers, I'm not good at math, I don't know how much money we need. Well, I know, but I don't want to say it. But yes, there is a lot of money, but what is at stake is much, much higher. And whatever the price of supporting Ukraine is, going at war yourself will be far more expensive. And the last point that I want to make, I don't know if I will be given another kind of round, so 30 seconds. I listen carefully to many friends, and I think I see one intellectual trap that we have to overcome. It's important, while supporting Ukraine, also to believe in Ukraine and not to prepare Ukraine for the worst. Every day, we in Ukraine make many decisions which require a lot of responsibility. We do not, future of the country, of soldiers, depends on decisions that we have to make. We know how to be cautious. But when you support us, do not prepare us for the worst. Because there is no difference then between telling Ukraine must concede and Ukraine may have to concede. It makes no difference to us. This is a very important point. We have to believe in victory, because if you don't believe in victory, you never win. We have to be rational, we have to be systemic, but I don't have to remind you that a year ago here in Munich, very few people believed that we would even survive. Believe in Ukraine and support Ukraine. And we're going to win, and you all are going to win. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Minister. That's a point very well taken. Prime Minister Kristersson, let's just return to the question of NATO. You have your own issues with NATO membership. So perhaps you'd like to comment on those, but maybe you could be clear, should Ukraine be a member of NATO?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before that happens, one necessary precondition for that is nothing resembling a peace, so to speak, with restrictions on Ukraine's right to self-determination, because that is obviously what Russia would like to have, regardless how the peace, so to speak, will be looking at it. But just one remark on parallel to the strong support for Ukraine, there is always a slight counter tendency to kind of be realistic. And I think we need to go back 1 year. To be realistic 1 year ago was absolutely not be sitting here today and seeing what we have seen. So this be realistic is sometimes very narrow-sighted. In that term, you really need to believe in what you are doing. And I think one very big moral support would actually be to follow the roadmap for Ukrainian EU membership, just to start there, because that is extremely realistic and a very necessary route for Ukraine. So to be forward-leaning, and I really urge all these countries that say and mean that we are supporting Ukraine to also see all the progress Ukraine is making in their efforts to become EU members. And that's a very possible. On NATO, well, we are on our way to NATO. We and Finland. It's that simple as that.
Will they be there before you?
Well, that is basically a Turkish decision. They have to make the ratification for Sweden and for Finland, and obviously everybody knows that only Turkey can make Turkish decisions. But we started this process together. We aim to follow one another together, and we aim to conclude it together as well. But obviously Turkey is making Turkish decisions.
I will not go down the path, Prime Minister Marin, on that one, but I wanted to ask you, Pavel, your take. You know NATO very well. Do you think Ukraine should be a member of NATO?
Sure, and I have repeated that several times. Ukraine not only deserves to be a member of NATO, they are technically prepared, they are fully interoperable, and they will be probably, if not the most experienced, then one of the most experienced militaries in Europe and globally. So I definitely think they should be part of NATO.
Thank you. Very clear. We have only a few minutes left, so I'm sorry I'm not going to call on anyone else from the floor, because I want to give a little bit of time for our panelists, including Foreign Minister Kaleva, because you were so eloquent, I don't want that to be your last word, to give us their, and I'm going to start with you, General Petraeus, because you got your predictions. You asked a very opposite question last year, will the Ukrainians fight? It was answered extremely powerfully. What is the question that you want to leave this year? What's the big uncertainty in your mind that hopefully will be answered very positively with this war behind us next year?
Well, again, if we assume, where I ended up, which is that, again, you have, my final points were NATO membership and EU membership and so forth, and a Marshall Plan. The item beyond that, the next question, with great respect to the Ukrainians, is, can you then establish the kind of really good governance, integrity in government, judicial system, the reform, even other reforms, all of which your government was elected, of course, to achieve, that could then be in the kind of context in which companies like KKR, which I represent, partner with $500 billion, that we would not only be cheering on the Marshall Plan, but we're going to be piling on with private capital. That's actually the next big issue. I'm convinced they're going to fight. I'm convinced they're going to win. I'm convinced in all these others. I'm convinced there will be a Marshall Plan, G7 EU all together. I'm actually pretty convinced there's going to be NATO membership, or again, a US-led ironclad security guarantee with an Article 5. Then the question is about can Ukraine achieve the kind of future that we believe it actually can, having seen the incredible engineering, IT, all these other skills that they have demonstrated that have enabled them to do so much that was unexpected beyond just pure fighting in the front lines and with armored vehicles. And if that can be done, then the future of Ukraine is extraordinary.
Thank you. Very clear. Kaja Kallas.
Yes, I mean, when we got our freedom back in 1991, there was a short opportunity window to do very difficult reforms because all the political parties were on our side. We were literally united, holding hands, and this was the time to do difficult reforms. And I see this in Ukraine the same. I mean, you have been through so difficult times and living through those times that political will is behind doing the necessary reforms, and that's why I'm very optimistic that this is the window of opportunity that we have to use. And also from the side of European Union, I mean, it is also in the interest of European Union that Ukraine does those reforms. Free market, rule of law, human rights, everything, ruling out corruption. So let's, I mean, like Minister Kuleba said, have really trust in Ukraine that they can do this. And I'm absolutely clear that the only security guarantee that really works is membership of NATO. I can tell by my own country's experience, if we wouldn't be in NATO, we would be living through some really hard times right now. But we are not, because we are in NATO. NATO is a peace project.
Thank you. Sanna, Marin, you're the last. Your final thoughts on this and looking forward, what are you most focused on for the next year?
Well, you mentioned before that we are only talking about this unity or that we need to support and continue supporting Ukraine. Of course, I travel across Europe, meet my colleagues and visit different European countries. And what I'm worried about is actually the resilience of European citizens. We are already seeing division in many countries, not my own. Finnish people are very supportive towards Ukraine. There is no division within Finland, whether it's the armed support to Ukraine or the NATO membership. We are united in these matters because we can remember from our own history what it was like. But in many countries in Europe, people are frustrated. And this needs to be said out loud, and this worries me. People are frustrated with the high inflation, they are frustrated with the high energy prices. There are people thinking that the war just end. This is causing us too much troubles, and people are not really remembering what is happening in Ukraine. So we need to make sure, and we need to say out loud that we will continue the support as long as it takes, as long as it needed. This needs to be said out loud and very strongly. And then we need to do the work within our countries to make sure that the people are behind the decisions that we are making. We need to make sure that we are united, and we need to stay united. There shouldn't be any freckles when it comes to the European countries, our support. So the next year will be difficult. I have full confidence to Ukraine and Ukrainian people that you will do whatever it takes. But we need to make sure that our citizens and our countries will also do whatever it takes that Ukraine will win the war. So this is something that we should really focus. And my final point is the Russian frozen assets. I think Russia should pay really high price for the attack on Ukraine. There are 400 billion euros or dollars frozen assets, Russian frozen assets. All of this should be used in Ukraine. Rebuilding Ukraine, helping Ukraine to rebuild all the demolish that Russia has created. So there needs to be find legal ways how to use these assets. This needs to be done because there has to be a very high price for Russia on the attack. If they can get away with it, then they can only repeat it. So high price for Russia, and Russia really needs to lose the war. So that history don't repeat itself anymore.
Thank you. That's very clear. We have literally a couple of minutes. President-elect Pavel, you take office in a few weeks. What will be your priority regarding Ukraine? What are you going to do? You come with immense credibility as someone who has a lot of military experience. What will you be saying? What will you be focusing on? What will be your priority here?
I would encourage us to have enough courage to take the right decisions at the right time and persistence to deliver successful results to Ukraine, including providing all necessary support, including giving Ukraine a clear message during summer summit of NATO in Vilnius, and also our determination to maintain a sanctions regime on Russia until necessary.
Thank you. General Petraeus and Anne, with apologies, we have run out of time, but I feel that Foreign Minister Kuleva really should have the last word. So the floor is yours briefly to have the last word and tell us what the parting shot that you would like us to remember this lunch by.
Thank you. To all of you. Thank you for everything you have done, and thank you for everything you will be doing. When we are united, trust me, even skeptics and rationalists or whoever, whatever you call them, there is nothing that can stop us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.